Have you ever won an argument and still felt terrible afterward? Like, congratulations, here's your trophy for being right. Unfortunately, the prize is anxiety, exhaustion, and replaying the conversation 17 more times in the shower. Because if you're anything like me, the argument doesn't end in the argument. It continues while you're driving, it continues while you're cleaning, it continues while you're trying to fall asleep, and suddenly, it's like you're giving a TED talk to someone who isn't even there. And lately, I've been realizing something. Peace is often worth more than being right. Not because truth doesn't matter, not because boundaries don't matter, but because some arguments cost more than they're worth. So today I want to talk about why we fight so hard to be understood, why being misunderstood hurts so much, and what happens when we stop trying to convince everyone and start protecting our peace instead. Welcome back to Wild Mind, Rooted Heart. I used to think I hated being misunderstood. Now I realize that's only partially true, because what I actually hated was not feeling seen. Because if we're being honest, most of us aren't actually trying to win arguments. We're trying to be understood. We want someone to see our intentions, to understand where we're coming from, to know we're not the villain in the story they're creating about us. And that is a very human thing, especially if you've spent a lot of your life feeling like you have to explain yourself. Maybe you grew up having to justify your feelings. Maybe people assumed the worst about you. Maybe you learned that if you could explain it just one more time, maybe then you'd finally be understood. And so we become professional explainers. Anybody else? Because I swear some of us could qualify for Olympic level over explaining. This is something I've definitely struggled with over the years for a lot of different reasons. And honestly, I'm still working on trying to find the balance between not over explaining and not being so short that people think I don't want to talk to them. It's definitely a work in progress. Growing up, people often came to me for advice. They'd come to me to help them understand a person, a situation, a conflict, whatever was kind of going on in their lives. I've always been able to see a different perspective and put complicated feelings into words. But here's the weird part. When it came down to my own feelings, my own experiences, or my own perspective, I felt like I was constantly explaining myself. And I think part of it was because I could articulate things that maybe didn't make sense to the emotionally immature adults around me. I could explain what I was feeling, why I was feeling it, what I needed, what I was experiencing, and somehow it still felt like it wasn't landing. Or worse, it wasn't believed. So I learned to explain more, and then explain it differently, and then explain it again, because deep down, I wasn't actually trying to win. I wasn't trying to be right. I just desperately wanted to feel and be understood. And that pattern, as they usually do, followed me into adulthood. It showed up in friendships, it showed up in dating, it showed up in relationships where I found myself clearly explaining what I needed, how I felt loved, what was hurting me, or what I was experiencing. And sometimes I'd keep explaining myself to the people who had no real interest in understanding me. And that is a hard realization because eventually you have to ask yourself, am I explaining this to a person who genuinely wants to understand? Or am I explaining it because I'm still trying to earn understanding from somebody who's decided not to give it? That one hit me like a truck because not everyone is listening to understand. Some people are listening to respond. Some people are listening to defend themselves, and some people stopped listening a long time ago. The healing for me has been realizing that understanding is something I can invite, but I can't force it. And if someone is committed to misunderstanding me, no amount of over explaining is going to change that. Maybe it was a friendship, a relationship, family, work drama, a situation where no matter how clearly you explained yourself, the other person still didn't get it. Or maybe they did get it and they just didn't agree. And that realization alone can be humbling. I have experienced that in so many different ways and times and points in my life, from parents, and definitely in relationships. You know how many times I've sat there just bawling my eyes out, not understanding how much simpler I could make myself or my needs or explain what was happening. And it did take me a long time to realize, like, some people just don't give a shit. If it's not just about them, they just do not care. And I now, after taking the time that I did to dedicate to myself for the first time in my life, to unpack all of my stuff, my baggage, reorganize the clutter, clear out what's no longer needed to be held, keep what is, learn how to hold space for new things, learning how to have self-control and patience. And I mean that in all ways. I'm holding out for something that I choose to believe is out there for my life in dating, in business. Like, all of these things will find me when they're meant to and how they're meant to. My job and my responsibility is to continue checking in with myself and continue making sure I know why I'm doing what I do. And that's really what matters. Like, as long as you know your intention, and this isn't to say don't try to explain yourself. This is when you've been explaining it and you're trying to talk it out with someone and they clearly just do not care. They're showing you that they don't care. There's nothing extra that you can do to try and, like, change their mind. From sincerely a girly who has had numerous relationships, poured myself into them, was not understanding what was going wrong. Now I know it was a whole bunch of things. Well, it's all connected. But I unconsciously, because of how I grew up and how that affected me, was continuing to choose partners that repeated a pattern. And it wasn't until I took the time to rebuild my foundation within myself, restructure. I've started building new walls in my home. I am, decorating certain areas that I feel like are ready, and continuing to be open and welcome to receiving love and support and guidance, however it may find its way to me. I know that I have love to give. I know that I am love, right? So I'm learning that by just being yourself, and if you are love, you will receive love. Like, it's a frequency, just like anything else. I've had to cut out a lot of relationships in my life, throughout my life, at different points and different times. And I've had to take breaks from others just because I needed to, again, get away from the outside noise. I didn't know back then what I know now, is how important it is for me to have every day a window of time to just decompress, just be me, not talk. I don't have to be on. I don't have to, I can just be. Like, I need time to just exist in order for my whole system to process everything that it needs to, and I can be a better version of me. I've learned so much about myself, and it was important. So that moving forward in my friendships, in my relationships, in life, I know how to better support myself. I will not tolerate people who are determined to misunderstand me, who are determined because they see the worst, probably in themselves. Again, anything I say about an observation of someone else, I have seen or recognized within myself or someone very close to me, like through growing up. I'm very observant, and we get one chance in this life, in this body, in this time. I just have had so much of it taken away from me, and just misery, and not a way I would choose again. I know that I went through it for a reason, because I wouldn't have and I wouldn't be this person that I am with the knowledge and all of the other things that come with healing and connection and just all the things. If I hadn't gone through all of what I went through and what I've seen and just all of it, it's made me who I am. And it's unfortunate when there's people that you love that just, yeah, see the worst. And that's just something I don't have to stay around, right? Like it is a choice. You are able to set boundaries and how you want to be treated and what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not. And I just got really tired. And so one thing I've learned recently is that arguments aren't usually draining because of the conversation itself. They're draining because of what we carry afterward. The mental replaying, the imaginary conversations, the I should have said this. The why didn't they understand me? Maybe if I explained differently. And before you know it, you've spent 3 days emotionally babysitting a situation that lasted 10 minutes. That is not peace. That is renting out space in your mind to someone who doesn't pay bills to be there. And sometimes I think healing is realizing that our energy is precious, not just our time, our energy. Because you can get more money, you can make more plans, but once your nervous system is fried, everything feels heavier. The laundry feels harder, work feels harder, relationships feel harder, life feels harder. And some people will gladly consume all of your energy if you're willing to hand it over. Not because they're evil, but because they have their own wounds, their own projections, and their own stories. And sometimes we get caught trying to manage all of that. I've spent so much time and energy in my life on people that just took me for granted, who were full blown energy vampires, who were they were manipulating. It's just really unfortunate. And it was hard for me to really choose myself and to understand how precious our energy is. Like at the end of the day, that determines so much of your life. That your energy is frequency, and the frequency that you are and that you feel and that you allow is what you're allowing to welcome and come into your life. It affects your nervous system. I got another fascinating thing. And if you've been in chronic stress like a lot of your life, and once you so the thing is, if you are someone who hasn't always been able to feel peace or know what peace even is, we all can have this idea, but if you haven't felt it or experienced it at all or very often, once you start to get that more, you start going, oh, wait a minute. This is how I'm supposed to feel. And it can feel weird at first. It can feel a little wrong. Sometimes you feel like euphoric and then you're like, oh, you feel a little guilty. But the more that I lean into that feeling, the more that I shine from within, to be honest. Because I believe when you change your internal world, and the more that you do that, and the more that you care for it and nurture it and do all of the things that feel hard, but are good for you, the more your external world is going to change, the more that things are going to shift, the more that you're going to start to see things differently. And I've had to learn to be okay with just being misunderstood, understanding that I may be a little bit different. I am not for everyone, and that is okay. And that was a hard one, coming from a people pleaser, an ex people pleaser for survival. Here's another thing I've learned is that you don't have to be understood in order to receive love from somebody. You cannot understand why someone does something and choose peace. Obviously, circumstances, all the things, but use discernment. You can choose peace to be like, that's just, you know what? That's a them thing. They will work through that in their own time. If it's something you can let go of, just let it go. I don't think enough people learn the lesson of just choose your battles. Life will be so much easier if you just choose your battles. Not everything is an argument. Not everything is an attack. And if it is, you're around someone where it's constantly feeling like that, I would look at that and evaluate and maybe remove yourself, even for a little while. And something else I've been sitting with lately is, what if not everyone is supposed to understand us? And I know nobody likes that answer. I certainly didn't, because I wanted everyone to see my heart, my intentions, my side of the story. But the truth is, every person sees us through the lens of their own experiences, their wounds, their beliefs, their fears, their expectations. And sometimes people aren't responding to who we actually are. They're responding to who they think we are, or who they need us to be for their story to make sense. And that's when I started realizing that self-trust is a spiritual practice. Because there comes a moment when you have to decide, do I trust my own heart, or do I need everyone else to agree with me before I can trust myself? And that's a hard question, because agreement feels safe. Validation feels safe. But self-trust? Self-trust asks us to stand in our truth, even when nobody's clapping, even when nobody understands, and even when somebody walks away with a completely different version of the story. Can we talk about how uncomfortable peace can actually feel? Because nobody warned me about that. We talk about wanting peace, manifesting peace, protecting peace. But when you've spent years living in stress, anxiety, overthinking, or people pleasing, peace can feel suspicious. You're waiting for the next problem, the next text, the next misunderstanding, the next thing to fix, because chaos became familiar. And our brains love familiar, even when familiar isn't healthy. So when we stop chasing the next argument, when we stop over explaining, when we stop trying to manage other people's opinions, there's this weird empty space. And at first, that can feel uncomfortable and honestly almost boring. But eventually, that space becomes freedom. And that's where healing starts to grow, not in the chaos, in the quiet. One of the hardest lessons I've learned is this: some people will have a story about you, and they will keep that story no matter what you say. Some people will think you're selfish. Others will think you're too giving. Some will think you're too emotional. Others will think you're cold. Some people will think you're amazing. Others won't like you at all. And here's the thing: none of those things are actually your responsibility, because people don't always see us as we are. They see us through the lens they are carrying. And sometimes healing looks like letting people have their own version of the story while you remain rooted in your truth. Not because you're giving up, not because you're weak, but because you've realized your peace is too valuable to spend convincing someone who has already decided. Maybe growth isn't getting everyone to understand you. Maybe growth is being okay when they don't. I think sometimes we hear choose peace and imagine becoming passive, like we're supposed to just smile and let people walk all over us. That is not what I'm talking about. Have I been there? Yes. Have I learned? Also, yes. Choosing peace doesn't mean abandoning yourself. It means honoring yourself without being consumed by the outcome. So choosing peace might sound like not responding immediately, not writing the 5-paragraph text, not stalking their social media for clues, not defending yourself to people who aren't asking questions in good faith, not spending hours trying to prove your worth, and not over-explaining yourself for the 15th time. Just saying, I've shared my perspective, I have been honest, I've honored myself, and now I'm letting it go, which we know is easier said than done. Some of us could turn a disagreement into a full Netflix documentary series. And before we finish today, I want you to think about one person, one situation, one argument, one misunderstanding, where you're still carrying the weight around of needing to be understood. And just for a moment, imagine setting it down. Imagine calling all of that energy back to yourself. The energy spent explaining, defending, convincing, replaying. What could grow in your life if that energy belonged to you again? Because maybe peace isn't something we find. Maybe peace is something we reclaim. One boundary, one conversation, one release at a time. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and we will see you for the next episode.